get to the Arizona Cardinals. Their offseason in 60 seconds. No real changes on the coaching staff. They lost Clayton Adams as their offensive line coach and hired Justin Fry to replace him. That was really the only change. Extended Trey McBride, 4 years, $76 million, $43 guaranteed. Signed Josh Sweat, 4 years, $76 million, $38 guaranteed. Dalvin Tomlinson, 2 years, $29 million, $15.5 guaranteed. Extended Baron Browning, 2 years, $15 million, $10 guaranteed. Brought in Jacoby Brissett, Calais Campbell, Akeem Davis-Gaither, and brought back Kelvin Beachum. Didn't really lose anybody of significance in free agency. Roy Lopez and Dennis Gardeck are really the only two guys that are not here anymore. Draft picks, defensive tackle Walter Nolan, 16th overall. Cornerback Will Johnson, 2nd round, 47th overall. Jordan Birch, defensive lineman, 3rd round, 78th overall. Linebacker Corey Simon in the 4th round, 115th overall. Dave, what are you excited to watch for the 2025 Arizona Cardinals?
I love roster building. I love the plans that front offices put in place over the course of multiple years. I love seeing what the blueprint and the build looks like for a team to achieve success. And I'm excited to see if the Cardinals plan comes together, because it feels like a lifetime ago. It really wasn't. At the start of the 2023 season, Jonathan Gannon's first season, the jokes were endless about whether the Cardinals were even trying to win games. Remember, like, Kyler Murray was on PUP because of his ACL tear. Paris Johnson and Garrett Williams had not played a game for this team. Trey McBride was he was a promising player, but he wasn't like a known dude. And only 5 guys from the 2023 defense that started the first game of the season are even still on the roster. Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson are the only starters left from that team. And so obviously, like, they've revamped the entire thing. It was the offense last year. It was the defense this year. And I don't need them to be world beaters, but I'm just excited to see if they're right about all the moves that they've made. And if they are, then this should be a pretty good team this year. They went from 4-13 to 8-9, and now it's time to take the next step. And I'm excited to see if that's something they can do.
They went from 29th in DVOA in 2023 to 12th last year, collectively, offense and defense combined. It's a significant step forward. Like, the progress has been there. And I completely agree with everything that you said in terms of, like, the trajectory of the franchise and what they're trying to be. And I actually think what they did in the draft this year is very indicative of where they are along that timeline. If you look at Paris Johnson, and I remember talking to people there after that first summer, that 2023 summer, 2 years ago, after they drafted Paris Johnson. The thought with those first couple drafts was, let's make sure we bring in people that are wired the right way, that can set a foundation for what we want the franchise and the locker room to look like. I don't think Paris Johnson was like the highest ceiling player ever drafted, but the wiring and the floor were something that they were excited about. Marvin Harrison was billed as like a generational wide receiver prospect, but I think Marvin Harrison has a lot of similarities to Paris Johnson in that way. Like, everything about the way that Marvin Harrison is wired, everything about the way that he works, there was a real floor to Marvin Harrison as a prospect. You compare that to Malik Neighbors, where maybe the ceiling was a little bit higher, but there were some concerns about what the baseline might be. Walter Nolan and Will Johnson are not that. Walter Nolan and Will Johnson are riskier players than that. Walter Nolan had some personality stuff coming out of Ole Miss. Will Johnson obviously had some injury stuff coming out of Michigan. But you hear about what those guys do on the practice field, and I think the Cardinals have done a good job, even if they've been a little bit wonky schematically, where if you put it in black and white and you allow your guys to paint by numbers a little bit, they've gotten the most out of the talent that's been on the roster. At a certain point, you need to stretch yourself a little bit to have guys that change your ceiling. And I think that's what Walter Nolan and Will Johnson are as swings. And you combine that with what they did in free agency, this is it. Like, this is the year where we're going to walk into the season in Arizona with an offense and a defense that has NFL caliber players up and down the roster. What can we do with it? So I think that is, David, is a perfect way to frame like what is different about this team and how it feels different heading into this year.
And like the Will Johnson of it all is really honestly what gets me the most excited, because typically I fall for the man coverage corners, the guys who can just like bump and run and just run with people and be really aggressive. And Will Johnson is really not that. He's more of like he's got good size, but he's a little bit more of a technician, a little bit more of a gambler at times, likes to jump on stuff. But given what Arizona does up front and what I assume they will continue to do up front with some of their weird and wonky blitzes and stuff like that, having a gambler is actually pretty good. And that adds to like 2 other really good pieces in the secondary. Like Budda Baker is continues to be one of the best safeties and most unique safeties in the league, and I expect them to be pretty interesting there still. And then Garrett Williams has quietly become one of the better nickels in the league, and so there's still maybe some questions about like what Max Melton is going to be on the other side outside, but like those three players of Johnson, Baker, and Williams, like that's a pretty damn good core for a young and good secondary.
Yeah, we'll see what Will Johnson is, but I think that exact DNA, Derek, you're talking about, where he's going to take some more chances, and Walter Nolan's that sort of player too.
Yeah.
Like every once in a while, having a guy that's going to backdoor a play and try to blow something up and have it work, you want those types of guys. You want those types of guys where like you have to tell your position coaches, you know what, you let that one go. Like you don't want to take that away from them, and they really haven't had those types of players, which is kind of why it's such a bummer that Walter Nolan is going to miss the first month of the season because
Yep.
I was curious what he would be in like the larger scale of this plan. And for me, what I'm excited about is just the defense, period. Derek, you and I talked about them on the Out of Nowhere Units show that we did. I truly do believe that they're one of those teams that finished outside of the top 10 in most metrics that can be like a definitive top 10 defense this year. DVOA projections, I think, has them as like the 7th best defense in the league. And I don't think that's crazy at all because their struggles last year were that they just could not line up and play up front because of the personnel that they had. They were 28th in rushing success rate last season. And that just put them in situations where they're behind the sticks all of the time. They created a lot of explosive plays on their end, but they also gave up a lot of explosive plays on the ground because of the way that they were playing. All the run blitzes, all the 3 safety stuff. So I want to watch a team that has a lot of creative, interesting ideas on defense and watch those ideas filtered through better players. I still think on early downs, we're going to see a lot of that 5-1 penny front stuff with the 3 safeties. But if those plays end as more 2nd and 9s than 2nd and 4s, are we going to get to a spot on 2nd and 9 where we're playing 4 down with 4 players that are as good or better than your offensive linemen, and we're going to let those guys go to work? That was not an option for this team in years past. So them just being able to be a little bit simpler because they have good talent and be a little bit more dangerous when they are dynamic and creative in those other situations, I do think that could lead to one of the best defenses in the league if things break right for them.
Yeah, for as much as I think we all love the like defense who can be like a little bit of a joker, a little bit of a wild card on any snap, like being a 10 out of 10 in that index is usually not good. It usually just means your team sucks. And like it's fun as like a curiosity to watch in week 13 when I need something to really inspire me that late in the season. But like ideally you're more of like an 8 out of 10 on that index. And hopefully with some of the players they added, that's kind of where they land.
I'm a little bit worried about the secondary depth. I will say that. I think losing Star Thomas before the season is actually something to note. And Sean Murphy-Bunting played a ton of snaps for them too last year, and he's also hurt. And so I do believe that by the end of this year, Will Johnson and Max Melton were going to be their 2 outside corners. But now you're in a spot where they have to be, right? Like you're relying on these guys from day one, and that just feels a little bit more precarious than the ideal situation heading into the season. But I believe that it was going to shake out that way anyway. So I think that all of those changes personnel-wise up front, all the talent that they added, even getting like Darius Robinson back. So you have like a first-round pick that being dropped back into the equation. Baron Browning is back. Like they have a collection where they can be weird if they want to, and they can just line up and hit you in the mouth if they want to. And that was just not the case for this team last year. Let's get to the swing points for the 2025 Cardinals. Dave, what do you got for me?
I mean, we just talked about it, but I think the Cardinals are trying to microwave a pass rush, and how well it works is going to be a huge turning point for this team. Like you sign Josh Sweat to a huge contract. You sign not like all pro defensive tackles, but defensive tackles who can do their jobs. Calais Campbell and Dalvin Tomlinson. You've got Darius Robinson coming back. It sucks that Walter Nolan is going to start the season on IR, but you'll get him back at some point in time. So it's funny. Like this is not a pass rush that I think on paper instills fear in your heart, but that's how much work the Cardinals needed, where you're like, this is great. This is an incredible improvement.
They're NFL players.
That's and like Josh Sweat kind of like encapsulates all that, right? Like Josh Sweat is not a star player. He had 8 sacks last year, and I know the playoff run like kind of like colors the way that we think about him. But like he's a good run defender who can win as a pass rusher. They didn't even have that last year. Like it was a lot of like hoping Zaven Collins just crushes the pocket and gets them somewhere. So the fact that they have a guy who like even in an ideal world, Sweat is probably your number 2. They did not have someone of even that quality last year. So getting him on the field, I do think goes a long way.
You know what I do love about it though is typically like the cliche is you overspend in free agency and you pay a guy who's pretty good to be a great player. And like you look at the situation and you're like, oh, that's what's happening with Josh Sweat. He's getting this crazy contract when he had such a better situation in Philadelphia. But he's making Greg Rousseau money. Like, it's not like Josh Sweat broke the market, you know, like it is a very fair contract for a good edge rusher. It's right in line with the production that Josh Sweat has had. So yeah, you pay more in free agency, but it's not a deal that should kill them. And it's not a deal that necessitates Josh Sweat is like a 14 sack player. He just needs to be the guy that he was in Philadelphia. And obviously you need the other things to hit, but it's nice to know that the Josh Sweat contract, it shouldn't be hanging over them the way that you see with some free agent acquisitions. But down the line, one stat that I just have to read off. I need you guys to know this. I need the listeners to know this. Calais Campbell turns 39 on Labor Day, actually. So here in a few days. At 39, he had more pressures last year than anyone on the Cardinals 2024 defense. Like
that's ridiculous.
That's what we're talking about. And on top of that, Calais Campbell finished with PFF's best run defense grade among interior defensive linemen. Like he's still a very good player. Dalvin Tomlinson, probably not as good as what you remember from the Giants or the Vikings, but again, just a massive improvement over what was in place. I did want to mention, Robert, because like you're talking about Walter Nolan, and it's been a theme all through these previews is like investment doesn't mean return. Darius Robinson basically had no rookie season. You know, they lost him right around this time last year to a calf injury. He comes back in November and was like on the field, but for who, for what? And it sucks for him. And I hope that year 2 is much better for him. But I think that's worth keeping in the back of your mind when you talk about a guy like Walter Nolan too, where early season training camp development is so big for these types of guys. I hope it doesn't derail Nolan the way that it did Robinson, because that's the unfortunate that happens in football, where you can lay your best plan in April and the realities of the sport screw it up by August. But you can't knock them for trying, man. They spent the resources to make this front at least viable.
The hope is by getting Jordan Burch in the 3rd round, you double down a little bit. And even if no one can't be good from the beginning, what if you get something out of Burch early on? So the fact that they threw like 6 bodies at this, you'd hope that at the end of it, you have 3 or 4 workable guys that you just didn't have last year, no matter how far the draft those guys happen to come from. I remember, I've told the story before, just very quickly, but I remember talking to Calais Campbell about kind of the twilight of his career and how he would think about his career in the NFL and, you know, what he wanted to do in his last couple seasons in the NFL, his legacy and going to the Hall of Fame. We had that conversation in 2019.
It was literally a different world at the time.
6 years ago, we were talking about this, about him being like, you know, I feel like I'm at the end. I'm the elder statesman in the group. We are 6 years later, and he is not only still playing in the NFL, but still playing at like a reasonably high level in the NFL. Him going back to the Cardinals is truly like one of my favorite stories in terms of player movement in the entire offseason. My swing point for the Cardinals, Derek, we alluded to this when we did the Quarterback at a Crossroads show that we had earlier this summer. It's Kyler Murray. Like Kyler Murray and what they get out of Kyler Murray. We probably don't talk about this enough when it comes to the fate of the Cardinals. And the issue with Kyler is that his peaks are very, very good, but the valleys are very bad. And that's still the case. Last year, Kyler had 5 games with an EPA per dropback of 0.24 or better. That's essentially Josh Allen over the course of the year. He also had 5 games with an EPA per dropback of negative 0.15 or worse. That's Daniel Jones. So 5 games a year, you're getting Josh Allen from a production standpoint, and 5 games a year, you're getting Daniel Jones. And how that ratio ends up shaking out, I know it's a real simple framing, but I think that's going to go a long way in dictating what the Cardinal season ultimately looks like.
It's incredibly like the more. I think we all want quarterbacks with peaks, and Kyler Murray very much has that. But I do think there is something to like all of the top 8 guys also don't really have valleys anymore. Like that's kind of the thing. That's kind of
maybe
always
a
been the
game.
issue. Yeah, like maybe everyone's gonna have like a game or two, right? Like during the course of the season. But it's like a consistent theme with Kyler Murray where you go into a week being like, is he gonna do it this week? Is he gonna do that again? And I think the difference to me between like, we kind of talked about on the NFC North show that Jordan Love can be a little bit up and down week to week, and I believe that a little bit less. I think sometimes Jordan Love just has like some throws that he misses, and that's kind of it. With Kyler Murray, I think the reason that there is like legitimate and consistent inconsistency is that he has actual limitations. Like Jordan Love doesn't really have limitations. He just up sometimes. Kyler Murray can't throw the middle of the field as well as some other guys. He can get a little bit crowded in the pocket because he's a little bit shorter. Sometimes touch can be a little bit of an issue for him, just getting the ball up and over. Like he's just has these limitations. And when defenses really call it the right way and can really get to him, you start to see it. And so I think that's why you get these games where, and we've talked about it before, in the red zone, because he's a little smaller, I think it's harder for him to see. It's harder to make some of these throws. That can really stall out an offense a little bit. And it can be the difference from we put up 21 or we put up 9 or 12 or 13 or whatever it is, something like that. And so I think him ironing out some of those things this year in year 3 of the system, I think is kind of necessary at this stage.
We talked about this when we did the show this summer, Derek, but I think a couple different things to consider in what the layers of this just schematically might look like that we haven't seen over the last couple of years. I would not be surprised if they ran him more in order to
Yeah.
really tap into what he can give you. And I think that they haven't really done that because he's been hurt. Obviously, the first year back, they didn't want to do that at all because he's coming back from an injury. And I think in year 2, they also were just a little bit worried about what that's meant for his long-term health when he's run the ball a lot. He's just a smaller player. And so are you willing to run him as much as you're willing to run Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson? I think it's a fair concern. I also think that you're defanging your offense by not using him in those situations because that adds a layer to what you can do, and it adds a layer to the run game. And so I feel like that is something that we're going to hopefully see a little bit more often this year.
That is, I understand the concerns. Like, I understand Kyler Murray's size, but if you're not willing to use his athleticism, then he wasn't worth the number 1 overall pick. Like, you gotta, and obviously this regime didn't draft him, but like, you gotta make your peace with that because that is what separates him. That's what makes him a quarterback you can win with, and that could be a hard needle to thread, obviously. And you don't want your quarterback to get hurt, but you got to find a way because if you're not taking advantage of that, then I don't think you're getting the most out of the guy.
So let's talk about what's keeping us up at night, Derek, because I do think that actually ties into what we could potentially get out of Kyler Murray this year. So when you're thinking about what's keeping you up at night with the Cardinals, where do you land?
For me, it's just the offensive line is not good enough, and they lost the guy who was responsible for making it probably look better than it should have been last year, and Clayton Adams, who was their run game coordinator. So, like, this was an offense last year, and we talked about this a couple of times during the season and probably once or twice during the offseason. When they could chalkboard people, like when they could really scheme it up with some of their pin pull stuff and really align it that way, some of their quarterback run stuff, they were a really, really good rushing offense. Like when they felt like they weren't being physically dominated by the other team, they could go for like 200 in a game. They were that style of rushing offense. The moment you could punch them in the face a little bit, they just didn't have the guys. Like they just did not have the guys. Like even for what Paris Johnson can be as a pass protector, he's not like a move guys around in the run game type of guy to me. And like none of the other really interior players prove that to me. And so if I'm going to be iffy about what the offensive line talent is, and they didn't add anyone, like the only change they're making is inserting Isaiah Adams as a full-time starter now, and they've now lost their run game coordinator that did all the cool stuff, it's a little bit hard for me to get excited about some of this.
I will say, I do think there is a path to the offensive line being better than it was last year. I still think that Paris Johnson in year 3 can take a significant step forward, and I think they do as well. I think like the Paris Johnson breakout is potentially on the table this year. Jonah Williams for them played 6 games last season. Jonah Williams isn't a star, but he's better than what they were getting from that right tackle spot last year. And you'd hope that in year 2, you can get a little bit more out of Isaiah Adams. Like if you told me at the end of this year that the talent level on the Cardinals defense was a significant step up by the end of 2025 compared to what it was in 2024, I would believe that. Like I do think that across the board, they can get better offensive line play than they did for a majority of the 2024 season.
I think significant is where I start to get a little bit like
It's
I don't
probably
know.
based on what you get out of Paris Johnson and Isaiah
Yeah.
Adams. Like if
And
those
and
guys don't take a step forward, then I do think that you're in a bad spot.
And I think even the problem with that to me is like, I do think Paris Johnson can take a leap. But again, in my mind, I think of him as like a Jake Matthews-ish left
Sure.
tackle, where he's a really good mover, exceptional pass protector. Sometimes you can just get into his chest and move him a little bit. And I think even in the ideal world, like that could be an issue for their run game particularly.
I got really excited about Jonah Williams last year, and so maybe I'm just hesitant. I don't wanna get hurt again, but it would be enormous if you got more out. I mean, hopefully a lot more. Obviously, like you said, he missed more than half the season. Hopefully, that goes better than it did last year.
I think that's about floor setting at right tackle, right?
Hmm.
Like having Jonah
Yeah.
Williams is a floor setting type thing that they did not have last year. So what I'm watching over the first month of the season is kind of a pivot off of this. And it's I want to know, without adding any players to the offense, what is going to be different? How is this going to feel different? How is this going to feel easier for the players on this offense? I do think that we're going to see the players moved around the formation much more than we did last year. I do think we're going to see opportunities schemed up for Marvin Harrison in ways we did not last year. He was used as like a true isolated X vertical receiver in this offense last season. I don't think that's where he's best. And this is a quiet one, but you and I have talked about this, Derek. Not having Zay Jones last year, I do think affects the way that you can use Marvin Harrison. When we talk about that idea of like a sacrificial X player where you're just tossing a guy out there and that allows some of your better players to move around a bit, I do think Zay Jones can do that for this team. So not adding an interior player, not adding another pass catcher, especially a field stretching one, I feel like I want to say it was a mistake. I don't think they went into the offseason not wanting to do either of those. I think the way things shook out, they just didn't have an opportunity for it. They weren't going to stretch for that type of player in the third round rather than taking Jordan Birch, who they really liked. But I do think with the guys they have, they can move Martin Harrison around a little bit more than they did last year. So I think doing a little bit more of that, getting us a little bit more pop in the run game. Like Trey Benson, for his limitations, still has more juice than James Conner does. So if you can have 3, 4 more 40-yard runs this year because Trey Benson is more a part of the offense. These are small things, but I think when you have all the same players, you have to seek out little small things on the margins that are going to make it feel different. And that's what I'm watching the first month of the season is what those things actually are within this offense.
To me, it's definitely the can we do something with Marvin Harrison Jr. Getting him to move around. Because again, the Zay Jones point is a good one. Like I don't love Zay Jones, but by the rules of the game, somebody has to stand on the line of scrimmage. And when it had to be Marvin Harrison Jr. every play, I just didn't love that. Like, and you couldn't have made it like last year. I don't think you wanted to do that with Michael Wilson because even though like he can do it, you probably want him to be like your power slot type. And then, like, what? They were going to put Greg Dortch on the line of scrimmage? Come on, get out of here. Like, they just didn't have the guys to do it. And so if Zay Jones can, kind of like we joked about earlier in the show, if he can literally just be what Demarcus Robinson was for the Rams last year and, like, just, like, line up there and not be a problem and have at least some modicum of, like, maybe we target this guy in a way that other guys weren't last year and then move Marvin Harrison Jr. around, that's enough. I also just think, like, Harrison Jr. is going to play better this year. I don't
Yeah.
think he's necessarily going to be like a 1,500-yard, like, oh my God, all-pro receiver. But I do think that we set the bar insanely high for what he was as a rookie. He was still a good rookie. And I think even with all that happening, we've like set the bar too low now. Like, I think he's still a really good player.
I was gonna say it has serious potential to bite you in the ass, but as far as developmental plans go, like if you're not going to do a lot of adding in the offseason, hoping that the receiver you took 4th overall and the running back who was the second back off the board in his draft class, 66th overall, hoping that those two guys haven't reached their ceiling that's not crazy. Like that is a completely reasonable hope.
And I feel like with Marvin Harrison, one of their charges to him this offseason was, can you just be more physical at the catch point?
Mhm.
And we saw what he did to his body this offseason in hopes of doing that. I would rather they just not ask him to be physical at the catch point quite as often in the way that he's used within the offense. But if some of those 50-50 balls can go the Cardinals' way in a way that they didn't last year, I think that also helps as we think about how this can feel a little bit different. The other important thing to mention here, I don't think we've really mentioned his name when it comes to this season. Trey McBride is the focal point of this passing game. Trey McBride
Yeah.
will continue to be the focal point of this passing game as long as he is healthy. And I think why that is important is you don't need Marvin Harrison to be like an all-pro player for this thing to all come together. You just need him to be slightly more dynamic and used in a more diverse way than he was last year if this thing is still going to go as Trey McBride goes. And I do think that is the plan.
Surely we can scheme up some red zone looks for my guy Trey while we're at it.
I
If the quarterback can
unfortunately,
get it to him.
I have attached my fate to Trey McBride in fantasy football this year, and so I will be living and dying with the Trey McBride red zone opportunities for the entire season.
You can't do worse than not scoring your first touchdown until December. Like
That
you
was my
just
thought as
could.
well. What is success, Dave, for the 2025 Cardinals?
I was going to try to do my wimpy thing and hold them to a very normal standard, but I think we talked about it, and I think y'all are right. I mean, it's year 3. There's been good progress every year. It's a wide open division. They were in the lead of this division late last year before they completely wet themselves. Make the playoffs. Make the playoffs. Don't lose 5 out of your final 7 games. Don't average 11 points per game against Seattle and the Rams at the end of the season and just go out with a whimper. Like, slightly better performance down the home stretch would have gotten you into the playoffs last year. So just keep it up. Just finish. That's football coaches love to say that. Finish and make the postseason. I don't think it's a completely crazy expectation.
Make the wild card.
Yeah. I mean,
Just
to continue
make the wild card.
Of putting like every team in the playoffs, like the Cardinals kind of have to make the playoffs. So like it's year 3. I think even removing like whatever you think about this roster, like year 3 for any regime is like, you got to do it. Like you got to get in. And last year, like you said, by DVOA, like they were what, 12th? Like that is, by the way that we do it, by having 14 playoff spots, that is effectively a playoff quality team. And so if we expect the offense to be around that range again, and the defense has at least like 8 NFL players starting instead of like 3 or 4, that should be enough to finish things and actually get you there in December.
I do think that this team has the makings of like 2 top 12 units. Like I would not be surprised if it shook out that way. And if it did, they should be a playoff team. And I think that's also the way that they're looking at it. If you're thinking about just like the vision for the franchise this year, the idea of, well, we didn't add anybody on offense, how are we going to be better? I think part of the answer to that is our defense is significantly better. Right. And if we can make that the combination where we're like top 10-ish units on both sides of the ball, I think that is a defined win for the Cardinals. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.